just one of the Thunderbolts. But the Thunderbolt takes audio, right?
Guys, thank you very much. Thank you so much.
It's okay? Yeah, audio, yeah. Oh, yeah. Perfect. There we go, perfect. Perfect. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it's happy hour right now, so I appreciate that you're here and not outside drinking aperitivo, so thank you very much for that. So my name is Mark Ellison. By day, I'm a data journalist, actually for the BBC, and I do a lot of freelance projects on the side as well, a lot of which have recently been graphic novels, hence the title of this presentation, Graphic Content, Graphic Novels. And so basically what I'm going to be doing today is, it's almost like show and tell, basically. I'll be walking through a couple of projects that I've done in the past, talking a little bit about the process, the challenges, the technology I've used, criticisms of the graphic novel format, and also I'll just be, at the very end, previewing a project that's upcoming actually this summer with the Huffington Post. And I'm hoping, I tend to be quite long-winded, and so I'm hoping that there will be time at the end to do some Q&A. I'm going to start out talking about the first graphic novel that I did 1 or 2 years ago now, I think it was, called Graphic Memories. Now, I don't know if you're all familiar with the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda. This was, you probably all know though, Kony 2012, Joseph Kony. Basically, the Lord's Resistance Army was an armed group that terrorized the north of Uganda for the better part of 2 decades. And although the guns have been silent in northern Uganda now for about a decade, the echoes of war still reverberate around the north. Tens of thousands of children were abducted by Joseph Kony's militia, and approximately about a third of those were young girls. And there's been lots in the media about the atrocities that child soldiers have undergone, but very little about what happens to them when they return home. And somebody wiser than me said, war is only half the story. So I often try and bill myself as a post-war correspondent. It's certainly a lot safer, but I think the stories, once the guns have fallen silent, are just as important as sort of showing the atrocities of wartime. And so what we see in actually this title slide here, it's a lady called Christine, and I'm going to focus on her story in a couple of slides' time. And it will make a little bit more sense when I do that as to who the girl is in the panel. So I've reported on the reintegration challenges facing female child soldiers in northern Uganda actually since 2011. I've done so, actually I guess I should really go back to that previous slide before I get onto that. And I've done so in traditional media, so be it print, radio, video documentaries. I even experimented with the sort of born into brothel formats where I gave some of the female child soldiers digital cameras of their own so that they could help. They were effectively empowered. They could tell their own stories as well. But I wanted to do something a little bit different and trying to sort of harness new digital technologies, something that was sort of interactive. I wanted to try and initiate a sort of intimate virtual conversation with characters like Christine. And so I'd long been a fan of graphic novels and the work of people like Art Spiegelman. Many of you are probably quite familiar with his fantastic work called Mouse. Mouse was serialized from 1980 to 1991, and it actually became the first graphic novel to win a Pulitzer Prize. It basically shows Spiegelman himself interviewing his father about his experiences as a Polish Jew and Holocaust survivor. The book uses postmodern techniques, most strikingly in its depiction of races as different kinds of animals. Jews as mice, Germans as cats, and non-Jewish Poles as pigs. And then, again, probably many of you who are here probably have an interest in graphic novels, and so, again, you probably know the name Joe Saccos, who has done fantastic work, and this is just a sample snapshot from one of his seminal works called Safe Area Gorazde. And so he visited Gorazde, a mainly Bosniak enclave in eastern Bosnia, during the wartime when it was surrounded by hostile Serb-dominated regions. And it's a fantastic piece. Saccos shows himself interviewing locals, and you get this great first-hand view of the war's brutal effect on the town. And I think that human beings we're naturally stimulated more by illustrations, photos, video than say a block of monochrome text. I know with my work online at BBC, we can actually sort of see how far down people scroll down on a written article. We can see how long they're engaged with that article, and you're lucky really if people read beyond the first 4 lines. And so this picture is just a picture of cave drawings found in the Lascaux caves depicting a hunt, which I believe the drawings are about 36,000 years old. So images like these are a way to remember events, to pass down stories to future generations. And I mean, that's ultimately what, as journalists, we're trying to do. We're trying to record, to report, to document. But as great as the work is of Art Spiegelman and Joe Saccos, I'm always one for trying to push the envelope, and as I said, trying to harness new digital technologies. And so I try and I sort of often label my work as the 2.0 version of the graphic novel. And so I'm trying to engage a population that's increasingly tech savvy, tablet and certainly mobile oriented. We expect, I think, as an audience, myself certainly included, all singing, all dancing content. And so that was something that I wanted to try and harness. And so I'm going to just open up the first comic I mentioned called Graphic Memories. Hopefully, yeah. So this is just the landing page of the website, and this was published actually with a number of organizations, Al Jazeera, the Toronto Star, the Ferret in Scotland. So this is just your landing page where you just have a little bit of a summary of the conflict in northern Uganda and the issues facing former child soldiers. And some of the issues are things like PTSD, mental health issues. Many have become HIV positive as a result of rape or being taken as wives. Many girls were abducted from school from as young as 6, so they've never had a formal education. So when they come back, they often come back with kids, and so they've never had an education, so it's really difficult for them to find meaningful work. So this is just a landing page, and so there's 4 chapters, and you can choose which woman's story you want to see. So we're just going to look at Christine's story briefly. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of zip through 1 or 2 chapters and just sort of tell you briefly maybe how I did certain things or why I did certain things. Sorry, just bear with me 1 second. Okay. Oh. Okay. And just a quick advisory warning. The 1 or 2 of bits of Christine's story are, if you excuse the pun, are a bit graphic in nature. So just a warning if anybody's a little bit squeamish. So again, we just have a brief landing page with each of the 4 women's stories, and I wanted, as I said, I wanted to take the audience on a journey effectively, and as I said, sort of initiate this conversation between you, the audience, and Christine. So I decided to basically use the sort of parallax scrolling effect. So as you scroll down, as you'll see in a minute, things animate, pop in, swirl around. And this was something that I programmed from scratch myself using simple JavaScript, HTML, and a library called Scroller. That's SK rather than SC, Scroller. And I just a disclaimer, I was actually a computer programmer for the better part of a decade before I got into journalism as part of my pre-midlife crisis. So I was lucky from that standpoint that I had the technical skills to do the programming myself. In hindsight, I wouldn't do this again because I was wearing every single hat from interviewer, photographer, videographer, programmer, promotional person. It was a nightmare. That's why I have no hair left. So with Christine's story, so as we scroll down, we have a nice portrait shot of Christine here, and then there's an introductory video there that I won't click on for now, just because I know that I don't have a lot of time. So her story opens with this young girl who comes and visits Christine every night. And I should say, actually, Christine was able to escape from the Lord's Resistance Army, well, now about 11, 12 years ago. But even now, most nights, this young girl comes to visit her. And then she gives quite a graphic description of how this young girl comes to the end of her bed and starts to basically decompose in front of her eyes. And essentially, I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, but essentially this is a girl who was also abducted by the Lord's Resistance Army and was much younger, and she came to see this young girl effectively as a daughter. And she talks about this guilt because one day she wasn't walking fast enough, and the leader of the armed group, the LRA, basically, well, you'll see in a minute, basically hacked her to death with a machete. So obviously this was extremely traumatizing, and it's effectively, she's suffering from PTSD, and this is why I think it's effectively guilt that she didn't do anything, she didn't intervene. And I should say as well that for every interview, obviously I get consent from, it's graphic journalism, just like being a regular journalist, you still have to get consent. With Christine, I obviously explained what it was I wanted to do with her story. I was very, very aware of the potential of her being re-traumatized in the telling of this story. So again, we always made sure that we said to her, you can stop the interview at any time. And we always made sure that there was a counselor or a social worker on hand, so just in case she did get upset and wanted to stop, then we could, and there was a trained professional there, just in case that happened. And so I'm going to play a video in a minute, and so here we go. So this is one of the sort of, this is an approach that I took. I call them sort of hybrid panels. It's almost like augmented reality, effectively, where we're sort of combining the traditional medium of photography, but also overlaying illustration on top. And I think it's really powerful because we're sort of meshing the past and the present, which I think is quite powerful. And it's also the embedding of photos and video constantly remind the reader, because after a few panels you might forget that this is a real story. So the use of photography and video can remind you that no, this really happened to Christine. And so here we see Christine finally getting counselling, 10 years later. So she's been dealing with this mental trauma for the better part of a decade. She was abducted very young. She's I think only had a few years of schooling. And thankfully for this, this local NGO is thankfully giving her counselling now. So I'm just going to whip through this. And this is just a form of therapy that they use, where they describe, the counsellor has her describe her life as a piece of rope, with flowers representing positive memories and stones representing bad or traumatic memories. And then through a period of sessions, she will have Christine basically talk through things, because in northern Uganda there's this typical approach where they refer to in our Western culture we say it's good to talk about these things to get it out, but in northern Uganda they talk about they refer to this as overthinking. So this is quite unique to northern Uganda, where they actually get people like Christine to talk through these traumatic memories. And I'm just going to, so these are just some of her sample memories. Though a positive memory, she was talking about how they would set buildings on fire with people inside them. And I'm just going to go, this is where we sort of see her being abducted at night. And I'm just going to take the liberty of just playing you, I think it's a 2-minute video. I'm just going to whip through this quickly. There we go.
Carjo mahwa cha ber me wo sa ber me wo ma mahwa kerni no wan burka jere do nyot jaber mo do nyoti kare toj te chak kwany lela donga na ma chel te chwalo ha jabit te kwanya te chwalo ha te katwa ka etal chamo karwa etal te chak puodwa tek jere wotonge ko kere panga chal barrio me bosa to nyar ge ka te ket gi gulo karmo kar gi gulo wanong puodwa to mi wani chak chamo chak chem gom quay ngụt chia quay nhà can te quay nhà mara.
So I should say, with the comic book format, I would say with the comic book format comes great responsibility, because obviously we could have drawn that and we could have shown if you again excuse the pun, quite a graphic scene. So we did do our best to try and well, as you can see here with this panel, we're not actually sort of showing anything that's gory, but and I debated with myself as to whether or not to include this video, to include this horrible scene. but I think it was really important to show it, just to sort of show just the trauma that these young women have been through, and why it's so tragic that there isn't counselling for them. And I should say, I mean, there's ultimately something of a sort of happy ending for Christine's story, the fact that she is getting this counselling, that she's getting support, that she's getting training to be a tailor. So I'm always one to try and combat negative stereotypes about Africa as a sort of, continent of disease, war, famine, and so I do try and find positive elements in the stories where I can. I'm just going to quickly show. I'm aware of time, so I'm just going to very quickly sort of show you Grace's story as well. So I'm just going to zip. So it's also a horrible beginning where she's forced to kill people. But what is fantastic about Grace's story is this is a reception center that she came back to as a child soldier just actually about 1 or 2 years ago. Many people think the LRA is now defunct, but actually child soldiers are actually still returning from the bush even now. But the great thing with Grace, sorry, I'm just going to skip through to where it is. She was abducted when she was very young, but because she didn't have an education, but it's ironic that she learnt a profession while she was in the bush as a child soldier. So she was designated to be the one to make alcohol in the bush for the soldiers. So she learned how to make this, and there's actually a video here that I won't play just because of time. But so she brought this skill back when she came back, and now she's actually got her own business making. It's the equivalent to gin, basically. So again, there's out of a really shitty situation, she's managed to find something positive out of it. So so that's what I document here with that. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint here. Okay. So I've done I think it's 4 or 5 different comics now. So these are just some screenshots of just some of them. So we've got graphic memories, we've got the top right. This is actually the Swahili version called Safe House, which is about girls escaping FGM, female genital mutilation and child marriage in Tanzania. Cash Cow was about child marriage, but in a different part of Tanzania. And then the bottom right, you can see a German version of the stories about former child soldiers in Uganda. And so after doing graphic memories, I had some feedback from some people who said, graphic memories looks great, but it doesn't work on mobile. I wanted to do that, but the programming was just a nightmare to try and do it for mobile as well. And it was funny, actually, because a few editors actually passed on the project because they were mobile first, and they said, frankly, if it doesn't work on mobile, we're not going to take it. I felt somewhat vindicated that the graphic memories was successful, and just a quick humble brag, it won a World Press Photo Multimedia Award last year, so it was nice that, it was still recognized even though it didn't work well on mobile. And so what we have here is just an example of what Safe House looks on mobile, and I'll actually just give you a quick live demo. So this is effectively what it would look like on mobile. So as you flip through the pages, it sort of zooms into different bits. Yeah. So it was really important for me to try and push the envelope a little bit more and have a fully responsive site this time around. Okay, and I'm just going to quickly show you the big version here. And again, I wanted to also change a few things with Safe House in the approach as well. So it was really important for me to have a Swahili version. Unfortunately, there wasn't a Luo version of graphic memories. Again, I just ran out of time, and my brain was frankly fried after doing all the programming and what have you. And also there's a PDF version up here that you can download, because with graphic memories, one criticism was that a local audience in Uganda couldn't couldn't read it or understand it or access it. So that's why I wanted a Swahili version, and I've been told actually by staff at the Safe House that they now use it to educate girls about their rights in terms of female genital mutilation and child marriage. And what's great is they actually have printed off the PDF version, and they're even taking it out into the rural communities and using it as a teaching aid for the parents, again, sort of showing them why these, certainly what we as Westerners think or see as pernicious practices. And so basically, there's 3 chapters here. There's Mama Mary, who was cut and forced to marry actually before the Safe House existed. So we see basically her story, and we see the impact that being cut and married off at such a young age has had on her in terms of not being able to go to school, horrible stories of marital rape. And I should say that the artist here, Daniel LaFrance, did a great job of, again, trying not to make it too sensational. And actually, sorry, I should mention that with Graphic Memories, I worked with the Ugandan artist, Christian Mugarura. And then the second chapter basically features Dorica. And the benefit as well of the graphic novel format is that in the case of Dorica, I think she was 12, and clearly still traumatized. She'd just run away from her family because they wanted her to be cut. So she'd literally just arrived at this safe house in northern Tanzania, and it was very important that we didn't identify her. So the graphic novel approach allows us to give vulnerable people anonymity. So this is just an introduction where we're sort of showing this actually happened. So we were going to interview Dorica's parents one day, and basically the social worker I was working with said, "Oh, there's girls that need to escape now. Can we use your car?" So, you know, for a split second, I debated whether or not, you know, as a journalist, I should be objective and not intervene, and thought about it, I think, for a nanosecond, and then we said, yeah, sure, you know, let's go. So we basically arranged a meeting point, and then, as you can see here, the girls basically came running out of the bush into the back of the car, and then we took them to the safe house, where they basically stay there for the sort of 4 to 6 week period of the cutting season, and then the staff, and here's lots of pictures of the girls at the safe house. The staff will then try and facilitate their return home, and get the parents to sign an affidavit, sort of basically affirming that they won't then have their daughters cut or married at a young age. Again, I'm a little bit conscious of time, that there are links to all these at the end that you can look at yourself after the fact. And you know, it's not really bedtime reading, but and I should say as well. So there's a physical copy here as well, and it was really important to try. You know, as journalists, we're always hoping for impact and trying to. You know, there's the buzz phrase of solutions journalism, and so this is just sort of one small way that I try and thank the girls and thank the staff for facilitating access to the safe house. So basically there's sales of the physical copy online, and yes, you can read it for free online, but all proceeds from the sale of the book basically go back to the safe house. So I've mentioned some critiques already, but one critique that I've had from some detractors are basically that comic book journalism, it's not real journalism. Some people have said, you know, drawings are open to an artist's interpretation and bias, that maybe a journalist's objectivity is compromised, and obviously objectivity is central to our job as a journalist. There's also concerns that a comic might not be factually accurate or as well researched as a traditional medium of a TV documentary or a print piece. And some people just have said to me, oh, you know, your use of the format is a gimmick or it's a fad. And my retort to that particular criticism is as often is, you know, if it means that people are learning about these practices, that they're engaging with it, then so be it. Call it whatever you like. Again, another criticism or problem with the graphic novel format is the misconceptions or connotations of the format. So people often think that it's a world of make-believe, a world where superheroes wear their underpants over their tights, like we see here with Christopher Reeve as Superman. That it's a world of exaggeration, embellishment, caricature. That it's purely an escapist medium meant to depict alternative dimensions or unrealistic scenarios. But I would say that comic book journalism is arguably a descendant of photojournalism. We both attempt to capture reality. We attempt to capture reality in our own ways, with a need for accompanying text, quotes, and context. We still have to adhere to the same rules and practices, be it interviewing, corroborating stories, balance, the use of finding good fixers and translators. We deal with, having to navigate unreliable sources, bias, personal safety, ethical dilemmas such as, do we make our particular sources anonymous or not? And this is I know sounding defensive, but I want to sort of show that traditional media also have problems around a bit of exaggeration or what we show, what we don't show. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with this photo. I think it's from 1936, taken by Robert Capa of the falling soldier during the Spanish Civil War. It's never really been proven, but many have argued that this was basically a staged photo of, I think it was a Republican, no, maybe not a Republican soldier, but a soldier being caught at the moment that he was shot. So again, this is just an example of, a photographer can construe reality as he sees fit. Another controversial photo by Kevin Carter. It's a fantastic photo, and not to downplay the importance of this photograph of famine in Sudan. But again, there are allegations that this photo, we just see a particular version of reality here. The natural fact, what you don't see is that there's a feeding station just off to the side. The mother is basically there. So it's maybe not quite as dramatic as it's made to seem, but that's not to downplay the importance of this photograph, educating people about the famine, but again, just to sort of show that we can abuse traditional media. Similarly, with another example of photography, this is just an example of where this was a photo carried by many news agencies before they realized that somebody had photoshopped in an extra missile or two, just to make it more dramatic. And then just in terms of print as well, an example of, I'm trying to remember the chap's name, Jonah Lehrer, a writer at the time for the New Yorker in 2012, who basically fabricated a number of quotes in an interview that he had with Bob Dylan. And so Art Spiegelman probably put it better than I ever can when he said, the phony objectivity that comes with a camera is a convention and a lie in the same way as writing in the third person rather than the first person. To write a comics journalism report, you're already making an acknowledgement of biases. So I think I covered a lot of these bullet points already, but effectively, I think it speaks for itself really that a comic book, a piece of non-fiction comic journalism, that the power of the image over text is arguably going to capture and engage an audience far faster, hopefully retain their interest. Effectively, the use of photography, video, illustration, the comic book almost becomes a time machine that we can plug chronological gaps. Hopefully we're engaging new audiences, young audiences who are used to digesting features on tablets, smartphones. I hope that the interactivity, again, sort of prolongs engagement. And as I mentioned as well, that I know that Safe House is being used as a pedagogical tool to educate not only people in Tanzania, but actually also in schools, be it in UK and Canada. But I also argue that just because you can doesn't mean that you should. So, one example is 360 video. It's the hot and sexy emerging technology, and I've seen people using it at news conferences or one-on-one interviews, and to me, that's just they're just doing it for the sake of it. And I would argue that with the graphic novel, it's I wouldn't use this for every story that I do. I just choose the stories that I think are going to be particularly powerful. I wouldn't use the graphic novel to tell the story of Brexit or anything like that. And so how am I doing for time? Oh, I'm doing pretty good. Okay. So what next? So I'm now putting together a new comic that that has been graciously funded by the European Journalism Centre, and I should actually say that EJC also funded Graphic Memories. And it was really difficult to fund this type of project because, and it actually took me 2 years to fund Graphic Memories, because I was going to different funding agencies or editors saying, you know, I want to do this graphic novel about female child soldiers. Some people thought that that meant that it was going to be purely fictional, and they said, well, we don't want that. Other people assumed that the term graphic meant that it was going to be really sort of sensational, in your face, and again, many editors just didn't want a part of that. So you know, my thanks goes out to the European Journalism Centre for funding the initial Graphic Memories project, because it's really been, from there, you know, it's been the initial stepping stone to doing these other projects. And so, just actually this past January and February, I went to the Central African Republic, which is a country that maybe many of you didn't know existed, probably certainly couldn't point to on a map. It's chronically underreported, certainly in the Anglophone media. And I think it's only really been in the media recently, just because 1 or 2 years ago there was a big conflict that happened. Well, it's actually arguably still ongoing. And so I basically applied for a grant to go out to Central African Republic, and I wanted to look at the demographic that is impacted by any conflict, and that's obviously children. And so I went out there for 5 weeks to look at what sort of challenges kids were facing. And so I'm just going to, this is actually very exciting. I feel like I should have a drum roll, but so this, I'm going to sort of show you guys basically the cover page. I mean, it's still a work in progress, the graphic novel. The artist is still working on it. But so this is the cover page of the project. So I've called it House Without Windows. And that's because I was talking to a doctor who works for Doctors Without Borders right in the north of Central African Republic on the Chadian border. And I said, you know, why in the Anglophone media haven't we heard more about the country, more about the conflict? And she said, you know, I don't really have an answer for you. Effectively, the Central African Republic is a house without windows, that without media coverage of what's going on here, of what's gone on in the past and is still going on, you know, how can things improve? How can pressure be put on the government to make sure the money's not being siphoned off through corruption and it's going towards healthcare, you know, like it should be, or education, things like that. So I read that phrase stuck with me, and so that's why you know, I've entitled it House Without Windows, and there's going to be a number of chapters in this forthcoming graphic novel, and it'll be coming out this summer with Huffington Post. And so one theme was health, and so here we see this wonderful boy called Dieu Fera, and he really lives up to his name. So Dieu Fera in French means effectively God will do, and this guy just puts such a positive face on everything that he's gone through. His mother had HIV and has since died. His father ran away. I don't know if you can quite make it out in the photo, but he is suffering from chronic malnutrition. He has malaria. He's HIV positive himself. He has TB, and yet, you know, he was so positive. But you know, this sort of shows the challenges that kids are facing, certainly in the remote parts of the country, because when the militias came through, people would run out of their houses and didn't have time to grab clothing or mosquito nets, so they're basically sleeping out in the middle of nowhere, so obviously heightened risk of malaria. There's very little to eat. They're eating tree bark or leaves, so you know, it's really a childhood interrupted effectively. I also worked with street kids in Bangui, which is the capital city, and there's always been an issue of a high prevalence of street kids in the capital city, but there's apparently been an explosion of street kids on the streets since the conflict, because many have been orphaned by the war. Others were taken as child soldiers and have since been reintegrated, and again, they're just living off the streets if their parents aren't there. I mean, some of the kids are there either just because they're being beaten by family that they still have, or there's a high prevalence rate of witchcraft accusations. So some of these kids have run away from home or the community because they've been accused of witchcraft and effectively feared for their life. And so I worked with a centre in Bangui that takes in street children and tries to sort of get them back into school or teaches them a skill. This one guy here was fantastic. He and his friends still live on the streets, and you can't see it in this particular photo, but rather than begging or stealing, they do flower arranging. And so I've got some great photos and 360 video where you see them basically doing flower arranging, and they sell these flowers to well, the foreigners basically. And then I did a chapter basically around education. I went to one town called Kano, and I chose it partially because it was hard hit during the height of the crisis. The Muslim and the Christian communities were really divided, and things are a bit quieter there now. But there's a school there where they are deliberately targeting Muslim and Christian children to come to the same school to basically aid reintegration, rehabilitation, and to sort of show that they shouldn't, irregardless of your religion, you can still be friends, and so that was why I chose that area. And it's also a diamond mining region, and many, so you can see here, so the child on the left is 13, and he basically works in the mines. There's actually a saying in the town, I'm trying to remember it, the pen is black but the diamond is clear. So they think, why should I try and scrounge out the money for school fees when I can hopefully find a nice big diamond in the mines. And here's just Husseina, who's a Muslim girl who her education was disrupted by the conflict. Often the militias would occupy the school buildings or loot them or burn them. So again, the comic will talk about basically how the education has been disrupted by conflict. And I wanted to do something a little bit different as well with this project. So I was sort of inspired by the sort of choose your own adventure format of books that I read as a kid, the ones where you can choose what you do next. So I wanted this project to be interactive in the sense that I wanted to give people almost a running commentary of what I was doing, where I was going next week, who I was going to be speaking to, maybe interesting things that I found out, and trying to engage certainly an international audience on Twitter, Instagram, trying to get their feedback so they could sort of say, oh, did you ask this question, or you should have asked this question, or what you're doing is stupid, you should be doing this. So just trying to really engage, certainly, an international audience using the Art Beyond Borders hashtag. But just as importantly, I wanted, often the local audience is neglected. So I partnered up with a local radio station called Radio Indica Luca. And here you can see, well, the photo I'm holding up, actually, it's a card. It's shaped in the shape of a champagne bottle. This was actually on my birthday, and we're in this radio studio. We would do weekly sessions where some days, some weeks, we would literally get back from the field, and we had to sort of take a taxi and speed over to the radio station to do a weekly update, sort of telling local listeners what we were doing, what we found, what was particularly interesting, where we're going next week. And then people could either phone into the radio station, or I gave out my phone number, and you've got a sample here on the left of a sample SMS where somebody's saying, you think the problem of street kids is bad in Bangui, you should go out to the remote areas, it's even worse. And what was really important with, this is a picture of Didier Kasai, who is the Central African artist I'm working with. And this time, with the past graphic novels, the artist actually traveled with me everywhere we went. And that was for sort of several reasons, partly because it was a great way to break the ice, that Didier would sort of maybe draw kids like Jufera here, and it was a great way to sort of get them to build up something of a rapport. And Didier is great with the kids as well. But this comic will be more like a Joe Sachko comic, where we have Didier is the central character basically. So I think that's really great, because not only does it tie together different geographic regions, so it's not like we're just jumping around randomly, there's something of a narrative thread, but also it sort of shows how how Didier is reacting to some of these stories, and by doing that, it shows it's basically holding our hand up and saying, you know, we're, as journalists, we try and be objective, but it's frankly not always possible when you hear things that have happened to G. Ferrer or Christine at the beginning. You know, it's hard to maintain objectivity. I often say that objectivity is, or the notion of objectivity is centrifugal. You know, you start off in the middle, but then you get whipped off to one side. It's hard, I think, to be completely impartial when you start hearing these stories. And then one other different tack that I'm taking with this new comic is using 360. And I know, yes, I said, you know, it's hot and sexy, but I felt that there was a real value in using it for this project because, I mean, frankly, how many of us are ever going to go to Central African Republic? Probably none of us. And it's a difficult place to travel in and work in, and again, I think that's partially why I don't have much hair left. But I thought, you know, 360 is basically all about transporting people to a new world. And going back to the title of this comic, trying to put you know, windows in this house, and you know, literally in this case through the use of 360. And so here we see one of the kids. I think this particular boy was 14, working in a diamond mine. And I should say as well, so I was using the Ricoh Theta, and that was just simply, it's not as great in terms of quality, but just being able to sort of be a sort of guerrilla journalist and being able to, you know, plug in and go, and rather than, you know, fussing around with a GoPro rig, it was the Ricoh Theta was great. And I took the Merge VR headset because it was a really good way to break the ice as well, because some people were a little bit nervous about the 360 camera. Actually, some people thought that I was using it to detect diamonds, that I was from a foreign mining company. So basically, I would sort of say, well, I can show you what it is that I'm doing. So basically, before I left, I live in Scotland, I took a sample 360 video and said, you know, I can show you what it is and I can show you where I live. So again, and so this is basically what the boy's doing. He's looking around this beautiful glen in Scotland, and I think his mind was sort of blown away just because it was so lush and green. And I just want to finish up just because I know I've been talking a lot, and I do want to leave time for questions. So I just want to sort of show you just one or two just samples of 360 that I have taken. And be gentle because I haven't had, this is all raw footage. So as you see my fat ass over here. So I haven't edited that out. I feel like doing an outtake reel where you just, all these different videos of where you just see me running away, or it should be like, where's Waldo? You have to sort of spot where Mark is in the scene. So this is just a sample of a diamond mine. Actually, here's Didier sending me, I think, a page for the graphic novel. So here's me, and here's Crispin, who is my fixer and translator. So here's me going to run and hide. And I'm not going to do this too fast because I don't want to make you feel seasick. So basically, you get an idea of just the scope of the mine here. And so yeah, these boys are aged sort of 13, 14. And again, as you can see, this is very rough, so the tripod's still there, so I have to edit that out. But you just get an idea of, you know, the conditions they're working in. I mean, this is the dry season; it's really bloody hot there. And we've got our audience up here as well, sort of wondering what the hell the white man is doing. But it was funny actually that my wife and I had a guest over for dinner the other day, and she had never heard of 360 video. And so we said, oh, well, how about you be a guinea pig? So I put the headset on her, and she's watching, well, actually all that she sees is me just running away. And she says, oh, okay, I don't really see anything. I said, oh, well, move your head. And so she started to sort of look around, well, in the 360-degree arc, and she's like, oh, wow. So you know, just to, again, it's all about sort of trying to transport your audience into these places where they'll never go, really trying to immerse them in the scene, and just so they get an idea of what it's like for these kids. I'm just going to just show you a few other clips quickly, because I do want to try and leave at least 10 minutes for questions. I'm just going to show you just a brief clip of one of the girls whose education was impacted by by the conflict. Well, actually, she missed out on education partly because her mother, and between the ages of 1 and 8, thought that she was actually possessed by a spirit. But then when her mother did let her go to school, that was at the time of the conflict. And you'll see in this video that she is like twice the size of the other kids in the classroom because she's been held back for so many years. So it'll start in a minute. So this is a classroom in Kano. And she's super enthusiastic.
Conjugaison, le verbe manger, au passé composé. J'ai mangé, tu as mangé, il a mangé, nous avons mangé, vous avez mangé.
So you get the idea, but I mean, it was great to see her because, she, as I said, she's sort of 5-6 years older than the other people in her class, but she's so enthusiastic. She's holding up her hand, clicking if she knows the answer, or tutting if other students get answers wrong to questions. It was quite funny to see. I'll just try and maybe show one more or two more quick examples. Doctors Without Borders, they have mobile health promoters that go around IDP camps. So they basically go around by bicycle, educating people about how they need to try and avoid getting malaria, or if people miss appointments, they basically go out on the bicycle and chase them up and say, where have you been? You need to come to your appointment. So I attached the camera to handlebars. So I'm just going to, there's me running off again. So here we go. So she's on a bicycle cycling through this Christian district. And again, I don't want to make you too seasick, but so you can see her sort of cycling through. And then basically we get to the point where she gets to, oh, let me just go back a little bit of that. So she gets here and she's basically checking up on with this mother just to see if she's taken her kids for their appointments. So again, just sort of trying to transport you to these faraway places. And I'll see if there's maybe one more that I can quickly show you. Just trying to think which would be a good one. All right. And again, just I know that a lot of the stories I've been talking about have been quite sort of negative in nature, so I just want to end with something that's happy. So there's, I went to a place called Cargo Bandoro where even now it's quite tense and you've got the varying militias there and things still kick off even now occasionally. But within the camps for the displaced people, they have these things called child-friendly spaces. So you have schools where the kids are still able to go to school, and then after school they do things like games and sing songs. So I'm just going to end with that with a happy scene here. So again, this won't be in the final video, obviously, but I'm just going to go over here. So anyway, I will end it there. But again, this is just to sort of show that, you know, and the importance of the format and how we can still use it with new and emerging technologies. And as I said, the importance of putting windows into these houses. So I'm going to leave it there and open it up to questions. Yeah. Oh. If we have any questions, anyway. If not, I can just talk all day really about this stuff.
Hello, I'm Ruben from Deutsche Welle, and thank you very much for this insight in your work. What do you think, what is the advantage of graphic novel journalism over classical photojournalism?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, hopefully I've sort of touched upon that a little bit. You know, if I take the case of the Child Soldier Project, absolutely, I can show the challenges that people like Christine are showing nowadays, be it access to healthcare or all the challenges of trauma, and show photos of her maybe where she was abducted or with a counselor, things like that. But the comic book is great because it allows us, as I said, to plug those chronological gaps so we can sort of show her whole story in one sort of seamless way. And I think it's as I said, I think we can then also play with the hybrid panels that I was talking about. So really that's the benefit that I found. And I think, I mean, myself included, I think we grew up with comics. I mean, myself, it was Tintin and Asterix, and so I think we have this affinity with the format as well that we're, we can, we're used to it, we know how it works. To then have, that format, but on a tablet or a phone, I think it's maybe a palatable way to engage in difficult and complex issues. So trying to explain to somebody about the Lord's Resistance Army and the complexities of the conflict and the issues facing child soldiers, I could do that as a written article, but people might give up a couple of paragraphs in, whereas with a graphic novel, I think you can ease your way in, and you can try and, I think it's an easy way to try and simplify what can be a complex or certainly a difficult subject to digest.
Hi, could you tell us a bit more about your process when on the field? Do you go traditionally about it, or film some interviews and then come back, and instead of editing the footage, coming up with a script, how do you do it?
That's a great question. So before, and I mean, I'm still learning about the best ways to do it, because every trip I sort of learn a new way to sort of streamline the process. But I typically, like I said, comic book journalism is just like regular journalism, so you'll do the research before you even go on the trip. I typically try and collaborate with local media outlets or NGOs that they can facilitate access to former child soldiers. I could try and find them under my own steam, but you can just imagine what sort of reaction you would get if you go up to somebody and say, hey, can I ask you about some of these really horrible things that happened to you? So I'll contact these organizations, I'll start even storyboarding in my head the sorts of things that I think I want to capture. If I know that I want to do some of these hybrid panels, I'll know that there's certain scenes that I want to get that the artist can then draw on top of, so be it the reception center or maybe the place where they're abducted from. And then when you're in the field, it's like being a regular journalist. You do your interviews, and as I mentioned, you still have to go through the same checks and balances in terms of getting consent and making sure that they know that, I mean, obviously a lot of the people I tend to work with, they don't know what the internet is, so basically you have to sort of explain basically whatever you're telling me anybody in the world can see. So photography, video typically is as normal. I always say that I won't do this for the next project, but I try and wear all the different hats of trying to do the interviewing, the research, the video, the photography, and it's insane. But I still do it. I don't know why I still do that. And the great thing with this last trip was that the artist was actually able to come out with me, and that made it easier from a sort of reference photo standpoint, because with graphic memories, cash cow, safe house, the artist wasn't always with me. So I would always have to make sure that I was taking reference photos, so be it of Christine's house or where she was abducted from, or a hospital, or a particular road where something happened. And that's just because I want to make the comic as realistic as possible. But at least with the project I'm working on right now, the artist was there, so he was basically doing all that himself. He was taking photos. In some of the interviews, he would maybe ask for a bit more detail from the parent or the child, sort of saying, oh, what was the weather like that day? What were you wearing? Because again, we want to try and we don't want it it's easy to take liberties with this format, and we try to be as diligent as we can. And then that's really just the beginning of the work. So you get back, often with myself, getting back from Central African Republic, my brain was fried. I was exhausted physically and mentally. So I typically take a couple of weeks off where I then come back to all the material with fresh eyes. And then you basically start storyboarding the comics, and I'm a great fan of Google Drive. So myself and Didier were using basically a Google spreadsheet. So he can see the script as I'm writing it. I typically have a column where he can add his own comments and sort of say, I think we should maybe phrase this, or you've missed this out, or give me suggestions on what he thinks that what illustrations we should do. And so right now he's actually doing the roughs for the project, and I'm busy editing the photos and the 360 video, and doing a comic book. It's not for the faint of heart because it's a lot of work. So I'm doing all this around my sort of day job at the BBC, and so these things take anywhere from 3 to 6 months to put together. So it's not for the faint-hearted, but for me these, I don't want to sound like a woe is me. For me these are passion projects. I believe in what I'm doing and believing about trying to get these underreported stories out. But so that's a very long-winded answer to your question.
I was wondering what you build your hybrid frames and the latest crop of graphic novels in, or do you still have to code?
Yeah, again, good question. So Graphic Memories, as I said, it was all custom coded, and I mean, as wonderful as I love the animated approach, it was a lot of extra work to do that. And I wanted it to be really lightweight so that it would work arguably in a developing country where the internet and bandwidth is slower. So it's basically HTML, JavaScript, the scroller library that I mentioned. I also used another JavaScript library for something called lazy loading. And basically what that is, I tried to make the photos and images, illustrations, as small a file as possible, because obviously if you have lots of 10 megabyte photographs, it's going to take forever to load. So I did try to make the illustrations small images, but with lazy loading, what it does is you can program it to just load as and when you need images. So I basically told it, I want you to load 4 pages in advance at a time. So that way it doesn't take as long for the page to render, particularly if you're, as I said, in a country where the bandwidth isn't as great. In terms of doing the photos and illustrations, the artist for that particular project, Christian, he did his work in Photoshop. I used Adobe Lightroom to edit my photos. And with the scroller library, you're basically just playing with the Z index in CSS so that you're overlaying in a hybrid panel, you're basically effectively just, it's almost like 3D, you're sort of overlaying an illustration on top of the photo. With Safe House and quite likely with House Without Windows, I'm using this fantastic open source library called Pulp. And again, there's a little bit of programming, but it's fairly plug and play. It's developed by a chap called Michael Keller, and it's almost out of the box. It's fully responsive, basically. I did contact him, and I worked together with him to tweak the code a little bit. So before you couldn't embed video, so now you can. But it's really a fantastic framework, and it's free, and you don't have to be super techie to get it working. Any other questions? It's almost beer o'clock. Yep.
I was just going to ask, with your programming background, and I mean you were very technical there, do you think it would have occurred to you to do this if you didn't have that programming background?
I think it would. I meant to put in a slide and I completely forgot about it. There's a fantastic graphic novel called The Photographer, which was published by Doctors Without Borders a few years ago. And it's set in 1980s Afghanistan, and it's and basically it was a photojournalist who embedded with the Doctors Without Borders team for, oh God, months. And he then worked with an artist like myself. But it's in that book where, I can't take credit for the idea of combining media, but it combines illustration and photo. And so it was there that I thought, oh wow, I was blown away by it when I saw it. And I thought, but wouldn't it be even better if you could put that online. So certainly the nucleus of the idea was there, and I was very fortunate that I had the programming chops to do it. But certainly the idea was there to try and combine the medium and for an online audience to try and animate it. But with, as I said, with the animated format, it was going to be a nightmare to get it to work for the mobile, because basically, not to get too technical, but basically with the scroller library, you have to sort of say how many pixels down you want something to fade in, and how many pixels down you want something to twist around or move in from the right, and it was a nightmare. So trying to do that then for a smaller screen for mobile, or for different sized mobiles, different sized tablets, it just would have been a nightmare. One workaround would have just been to have had static images for mobile. But to go back to your original question, so the nucleus of the idea was there, and I was just fortunate that I had the programming chops to do it. We're good. I will be here packing up, so if anybody else has any questions, but I know you've been very patient, and I know you want to go get a drink, as do I. So thank you very much. Parameters in the URL, so you can remove a lot of the buttons. If you pay for an account, you can make sure that the YouTube watermark is not there. Actually, Vimeo is starting to do video too.
I think the automarks just skipped by YouTube.
Sorry?
The automarks YouTube just cancelled. So just removed it.
Okay. Oh yeah, thank you. But Vimeo has literally in the last few weeks started doing 360. So good news, yeah. Yeah, just send me I'll probably be around either chatting or having a drink or whatever. So we'll see you later. Oh, how are you doing? Nice to finally meet you in person.
Yes, exactly. If you're going to be upstairs for beer.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Delighted to find you.
Oh, that'd be great. And, well, even if I don't catch you, but hopefully I will, we can chat, having these up. The echoes of war still reverberate around the north. Tens of thousands of children were abducted by Joseph Kony's militia, and approximately about a third of those were young girls. And there's been lots in the media about the atrocities that child soldiers have undergone, but very little about what happens to them when they return home. And somebody wiser than me said, war is only half the story. So I often try and bill myself as a post-war correspondent. It's certainly a lot safer, but I think the stories, once the guns have fallen silent, are just as important as sort of showing the atrocities of wartime. And so what we see in actually this title slide here, it's a lady called Christine, and I'm going to focus on her story in a couple of slides' time, and it will make a little bit more sense when I do that as to who the girl is in the panel. So I've reported on the reintegration challenges facing female child soldiers in northern Uganda actually since 2011. I've done so, actually I guess I should really go back to that previous slide before I get onto that. And I've done so in traditional media, so be it print, radio, video documentaries. I even experimented with the sort of born into brothel formats where I gave some of the female child soldiers digital cameras of their own so that they could help they were effectively empowered, they could tell their own stories as well. But I wanted to do something a little bit different and trying to sort of harness new digital technologies, something that was sort of interactive. I wanted to try and initiate a sort of intimate virtual conversation with characters like Christine. And so I'd long been a fan of graphic novels and the work of people like Art Spiegelman. Many of you are probably quite familiar with his fantastic work called Mouse. Mouse was serialized from 1980 to 1991, and it actually became the first graphic novel to win a Pulitzer Prize. It basically shows Spiegelman himself interviewing his father about his experiences as a Polish Jew and Holocaust survivor. The book uses postmodern techniques, most strikingly in its depiction of races as different kinds of animals. Jews as mice, Germans as cats. You just have a little bit of a summary of the conflict in northern Uganda and the issues facing former child soldiers. And some of the issues are things like PTSD, mental health issues. Many have become HIV positive as a result of rape or being taken as wives. Many girls were abducted from school from as young as 6, so they've never had a formal education. So when they come back, they often come back with kids, and so they've never had an education, so it's really difficult for them to find meaningful work. So this is just a landing page, and so there's 4 chapters, and you can choose which woman's story you want to see. So we're just going to look at Christine's story briefly. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of zip through 1 or 2 chapters and just sort of tell you briefly maybe how I did certain things or why I did certain things. Sorry, just bear with me 1 second. Okay. Oh. Okay. And just a quick advisory warning. The 1 or 2 of bits of Christine's story are, if you excuse the pun, are a bit graphic in nature. So just a warning if anybody's a little bit squeamish. So again, we just have a brief landing page with each of the 4 women's stories, and I wanted, as I said, I wanted to take the audience on a journey effectively, and as I said, sort of initiate this conversation between you, the audience, and Christine. So I decided to basically use the sort of parallax scrolling effect. So as you scroll down, as you'll see in a minute, things animate, pop in, swirl around. And this was something that I programmed from scratch myself using simple JavaScript, HTML, and a library called Scroller. That's SK rather than SC, Scroller. And I just a disclaimer, I was actually a computer programmer for the better part of a decade before I got into journalism as part of my pre-midlife crisis. So I was lucky from that standpoint that I had the technical skills to do the programming myself. In hindsight, I wouldn't do this again because I was wearing every single hat from interviewer, photographer, videographer, programmer, promotional person. It was a nightmare. That's why I have no hair left. So with Christine's story, so as we scroll down, we have a nice portrait shot of Christine. Just one of the Thunderbolts. The Thunderbolt takes audio, right? cats and non-Jewish Poles as pigs. And then, again, probably many of you who are here probably have an interest in graphic novels, and so, again, you probably know the name Joe Saccos, who has done fantastic work, and this is just a sample snapshot from one of his seminal works called Safe Area Gorazde. And so he visited Gorazde, a mainly Bosniak enclave in eastern Bosnia, during the wartime when it was surrounded by hostile Serb-dominated regions. And it's a fantastic piece. Saccos shows himself interviewing locals, and you get this great first-hand view of the war's brutal effect on the town. And I think that human beings, we're naturally stimulated more by illustrations, photos, video than, say, a block of monochrome text. I know with my work online at BBC, we can actually sort of see how far down people scroll down on a written article. We can see how long they're engaged with that article. And you're lucky, really, if people read beyond the first 4 lines. And so this picture is just a picture of cave drawings found in the Lascaux caves depicting a hunt, which I believe the drawings are about 36,000 years old. So images like these are a way to remember events, to pass down stories to future generations. And I mean, that's ultimately what, as journalists, we're trying to do. We're trying to record, to report, to document. But as great as the work is of Art Spiegelman and Joe Saccos, I'm always one for trying to push the envelope, and as I said, trying to harness new digital technologies. And so I try and I sort of often label my work as the 2.0 version of the graphic novel. And so I'm trying to engage a population that's increasingly tech-savvy, tablet, and certainly mobile-oriented. We expect, I think, as an audience, myself certainly included, all singing, all dancing content. And so that was something that I wanted to try and harness. And so I'm going to just open up the first comic I mentioned called Graphic Memories. Hopefully, yeah. So this is just the landing page of the website, and this was published actually with a number of organizations, Al Jazeera, the Toronto Star, the Ferret in Scotland. So this is just your landing page where it's okay? Yeah, audio, yeah. Yeah. Perfect. There we go, perfect. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it's happy hour right now, so I appreciate that you're here and not outside drinking aperitivo, so thank you very much for that. So my name is Mark Ellison. By day, I'm a data journalist, actually for the BBC, and I do a lot of freelance projects on the side as well, a lot of which have recently been graphic novels, hence the title of this presentation, Graphic Content, Graphic Novels. And so basically what I'm going to be doing today is, it's almost like show and tell, basically. I'll be walking through a couple of projects that I've done in the past, talking a little bit about the process, the challenges, the technology I've used, criticisms of the graphic novel format, and also I'll just be, at the very end, previewing a project that's upcoming actually this summer with the Huffington Post. And I'm hoping, I tend to be quite long-winded, and so I'm hoping that there will be time at the end to do some Q&A. I'm going to start out talking about the first graphic novel that I did 1 or 2 years ago now, I think it was, called Graphic Memories. Now, I don't know if you're all familiar with the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda. This was, you probably all know though, Kony 2012, Joseph Kony. Basically, the Lord's Resistance Army was an armed group that terrorized the north of Uganda for the better part of 2 decades. And although the guns have been silent in northern Uganda now for about a decade,